Hello and welcome to episode 252 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. This week I have more on Pakistan's unstoppable solar boom. It's a perfect storm of an unreliable electricity grid with daily blackouts and rising prices of that energy. And now, there's only a 1.5-year payback period there.
Researchers have identified key areas in the U.S. that would benefit the most from switching from industrial boilers to industrial heat pumps. You know, when I started this podcast, I didn't even know what an industrial boiler was, and now I practically am one.
Isn't that true for so many things? We've learned so many things and had to educate ourselves for this podcast. I have some very upsetting news about the Chinese EV and battery maker BYD. I had to bandy about the word slavery, but, I'm not going to do that. But that's only in case Brian realizes he doesn't get paid for the podcast. I don't want him to start thinking that way.
I don't get paid? We're going to have to talk about that. Massachusetts is launching a pilot program to explore vehicle-to-everything power distribution. While this is great news, I really hope we get past pilot programs soon. Except for pilots. We really need to make sure our pilots are still taking pilot programs, especially after that plane flipped over in Toronto.
Well, all that and more on this edition of the Clean Energy Show. And also this week, we have, for the first time in our 5-year history, a draw.
Wow.
I will be drawing a name, and some lucky winner will win 1 year free of the Clean Club membership on our Patreon page.
That's fantastic.
That's exciting. I have here, Brian, a bowl with countless names in it. I've mixed it. I've pre-mixed it. I will mix it again before the draw momentarily. That is exciting.
Wow.
Well, and also we have a bit on racism and somebody who got a free vehicle because of being a victim of that. So, nothing to do with you this week. It was a slow week for the Stockton.
Yeah, not much going on. But last week, I know you really enjoyed the video that I found of Saturday Night Live and the global warming Christmas special from 1990. And you enjoyed that so much, it looks like you just kept looking into that.
I had to look into it. I was quite struck by it. And I noticed that they re-aired the segment during the Xmas show, the Christmas show in 2021. Christmas shows are the big one for Saturday Night Live. A lot of people watch, a lot of celebrities show up. However, there was Omicron back then. I hate to bring up these negative things, but that is the variant of the virus, and the production got shut down, so they had to air old segments based on,
right.
They had shot some stuff, and what they shot, the pre-tapes, as they called them.
Yeah, they were going to go ahead with a show, but then sort of at the last minute kind of switched it to a clip show.
Yeah, so they had Tom Hanks, I guess, was maybe part of it or became part of it remotely or otherwise. And Robert Smigel, one of the writers for Conan O'Brien and Saturday Night Live for many years, also the author of filmmaker behind TV Funhouse, he says Tom Hanks chose this. It was not my idea, but I worked on the Carl Sagan Global Warming Christmas special where he played Dean Martin. I believe it was Greg Daniels' idea, but we all worked on it. Greg Daniels is the creator of The American Office and Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
Kind of a showrunner of some of those great comedies. He was a writer on Saturday Night Live when this happened.
Yeah, I thought it felt like a Mike Myers sketch. I might have thought that it was he that had written it, but...
Yeah, it's an unusual sketch in the history of the show, and they brought it back, and I think they asked different people, I think they had 3 hosts that week or something, and they asked them to bring it back. The funny thing is, though, I'm pretty sure I saw that show. I remember the show, and I don't remember the global... Maybe we talked about it on the episode. Who knows?
We just don't remember.
We've done so many. It's hard to understand what's going on. My son called me the other day, Brian. Now, when my son calls, I have now a visceral reaction to it because not always, but most of the time, something horrible has happened to the poor boy.
Yeah.
And he's in a crisis, okay? There's been a couple of times since, though, that he's called and nothing's been wrong, but my heart still jumps out of my body.
Sure.
Because, it's been a car problem or a flat tire in the middle of nowhere. Well, this time it was a car problem again, and it was a bad one. It was a nightmare of all people to have this problem. He had a couple buddies in town for the Tyler the Entertainer concert in Vancouver, which he said was spectacular. They flew in and stayed in his apartment. He's gone out and bought a bunch of IKEA stuff to be a good host, which I will take advantage of this summer. And he called me from the Sea to Sky Highway, which I know you're familiar with, right?
Yeah.
It's the highway that goes along the coast. It was built expanded for the Olympics in 2010 to go to Whistler, where all the skiing is. Very busy highway. Well, there was a terrible accident on there. It didn't involve my son, but it involved air ambulances, and of course it shut down both directions of the highway. So we stuck there in a parking lot, turned off his car,
Yep.
but left the radio on, and it wouldn't start.
No.
And the reason I brought this up is because in our electric car world, this is one of the glorious things about electric cars. You can sit there forever. You don't think about turning it off, ever.
Yeah.
There is no reason to turn it off. You're not thinking, oh, I'm burning gas. You're powering the air conditioner or you're powering the radio, which would use practically nothing in the grand scheme of your battery. But no, in the gas car world, it just didn't start. Plus, somebody tried to steal his car. So they broke into a closed, secure condo garage that he's renting, like he rents the condo from a sublet set. And yeah, they went after his 2002 Honda Civic for some reason. Maybe it's easy to steal. And they ripped off a bunch of stuff, and I don't know if they got interrupted, but, I thought maybe his key was screwed up. So this is by a miracle of God somehow. I came up with the idea to wiggle the key, to push it in, pull it out, wiggle it around, jam it, shake it around.
Well, sure.
And damn it, Brian, if that didn't work. But the show...
we used to have to do that kind of thing.
Jerry Seinfeld always had this joke on his act a long time ago where he said people always open their hoods even though they don't know how to fix a car. They think there might be a giant on-off switch in there that they somehow got into the off position and they could just flick it on. Well, my son decided to pour oil into his car for no reason, thinking that that's why it didn't start.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm a freaking mechanic, but it seems like our generation, we just kind of had to deal with crap.
Yeah.
That, we didn't have the best of everything like kids today.
Well, I have a vague memory. I used to own a 1972 AMC Gremlin.
Why?
Which is...
I think I did for like a month. My dad had one for a month and it literally crapped out and we had to get a different used car.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I believe I paid $75 for it. So, it was not like a big investment.
So you got ripped off.
So I got ripped off. And I used it for a film that I made way back in 1990. I thought this would be a great movie car. It's sort of similar to, my film came out around the same time as Wayne's World. And in Wayne's World, the joke was they had an AMC Pacer. And in my movie, the joke was they had an AMC Gremlin.
We had a Pacer. We had a Pacer. Yeah.
Oh, you had a Pacer.
Same thing, though.
But my movie came out before Wayne's World. But that's beside the point. Yeah, I mostly bought it for that, and it was kind of a fun little car. But I have a vague memory that, there was some kind of a key problem, and I think for a while I just left the key in the ignition because that was the, safest way to get it to start.
Okay. Well, thank God it started because you know what, Brian? The traffic had just started to move, and I could hear the honking in the background.
Yeah.
And he insisted on having his flashers on, which was going to drain the battery further. But I don't know how I even did this. I got one of his buddies to get out because he couldn't get out because of the traffic. His buddy got out and I said, turn on the headlights, and they looked bright. He said, they look normal. So I thought, okay, It's not dead. He just listened to music for 10 minutes or whatever. That's not going to kill the battery. And it was a warm day. It was practically a summer day on the coast. And I said, okay, maybe that's that. So let's try that. And it worked. And he got it going just in time, but his pants were covered with oil. The kid had a panic attack. Freaking out.
Well, I think sometimes there's a dead spot on the the starter or something. That happens sometimes. So maybe it was that.
Yeah, that could have happened. I'm not sure, but it's an old car. I mean, just the age of the car and the wear and tear of starting it so much like that. Who knows? But the news right now is pretty bleak. I'm not going to get into it, but there's one story that struck me because it's something we talked about before on the show. One time we talked about a solar advocate in Alberta, Canada, who said, we shouldn't be putting government funds into rooftop solar. We should be putting it into, the cheapest kind of solar, which is putting them, it's because rooftop is small. Yeah. You have to do more, soft costs of getting that done. Yeah. But if you do it in one massive thing, like a lot of things, that's the cheapest way to put government money to decarbonize the grid, which we need to do urgently. And he said, well, what we could do is we should be building solar in Arizona and piping it up to Alberta because Arizona has longer and less seasonality to its solar gain and a lot, really good, number of sunshine days. So, but the other advocates said, well, what happens if there's a political crisis and they cut it off? We'd be screwed. And everyone laughed and said, well, that would never happen. Well, guess what's happening right now? There's a tariff dispute in Canada, and the premier of the large province of Ontario, where all the automotive manufacturing is and all the good jobs and that go with that and auto parts, that they are going to be in dire shape. He just called an early election because he knew he'd get screwed if the economy tanked.
Yeah.
And just as we're recording this, 25% tariffs are going on everything in Canada. And he's playing the bad cop in this. Maybe the prime minister is playing the good cop, but he is pissed.
But if they want to try to annihilate Ontario, I will do everything, including cut off their energy, with a smile on my face.
Yeah, that's the quote of the week. I'm going to cut off their energy. He's talking about gas that goes to heat homes. He's talking about electricity. There's a lot of electricity that goes from north to south.
Yeah.
And who'd have thought we'd ever have a political dispute with our best friends and oldest neighbor, the United States? But here we are. It's going on. And, this kind of throws a monkey wrench into the idea because we need to share energy with renewables because they're variable. The more borders we can cross and a larger, landscape we can cover and transfer that back and forth where it's cloudy in one place, windy in another place. We need to do that. And, we should all be getting along. I don't want to, state the obvious, but that's what should be going on.
Yeah, and Ontario has lots of nuclear and hydro, and they're just well suited for power generation at this point. And they have so much that, a lot of it flows south across the border into, the American states like New York.
So last week we talked about the podcast Undecided with Matt Farrell, right? It's a popular YouTube channel on clean energy and other things and technology. He does about one video a week. He researches it. He has somebody doing graphics for him and everything. And it gets a lot of views. And he kind of strangely came to where Brian and I are. If you're new to the show, we live in Saskatchewan, Canada. That is the prairies of Canada. We have 1.1 million people in population on a very large landmass. We live in a city of 250,000. And it struck me when he followed up on that, Brian, because they have a podcast, a little listen to podcast that discusses the previous video that he put out. He does it with his brother. And they didn't really understand, where he had gone to.
For those of you who haven't watched the video, if you want to see a whole lot of nowhere, check out the video. Driving there, I landed and I was driving there at sunset and saw the most beautiful sunset, as I'm driving away from the city where the airport was. And then I started getting into more and more remote areas. And then the road was just as pin straight as you can imagine. And you look to your left, it's farmland. You look to your right, and it's farmland as far as you can see.
Yeah, he went on to say it was a very beautiful place, but he also couldn't remember the city he flew into, which is our city, which is insulting. Why? Okay, maybe he didn't want to say it. Maybe he was confused because it rhymes with vagina. It's Regina. It is Latin for queen. And a lot of people just don't understand that. Mick Jagger famously made a joke about our city during a concert here, saying it rhymes with fun. And that sort of caught on with the locals. But I don't know how else to say it. I didn't want to use the V word on our podcast. Didn't think that would ever happen. But Matt, Regina, Saskatchewan. Not that anyone should care. We're just a bunch of rednecks here, except for Brian and I.
Yeah, and I don't know which route he took, but that's often the route that I take to drive to our cottage, which is where that wind farm is. So I drove past that wind farm.
Well, he implied there was nobody
times.
On the roads. There's always people on the roads. Well, I go in the summertime, but
But there is sort of two highways you could take, so I'm not sure which one. But one of them is 88 kilometers that's perfectly straight, where there is, nothing. Yeah. And there's a train track as well. So from here to Stoughton, there's a perfectly flat train track, straight, flat train track that's 88 kilometers long. And it's one of the longest stretches of absolutely straight rail track anywhere. And the highway goes beside it.
Yeah.
But if you're for the big city,
haven't they measured things on that highway because it's so straight, like the curvature of the earth or something? I thought you brought that up once on a podcast many years ago on one of our
it's another one of those things we probably talked about and now cannot remember.
So I watched the movie Superman. I had bought it on iTunes, because it was $5 and they remixed it in Atmos and had a 4K scan of it.
Yeah.
And I just love, how I love Atmos. You love Atmos, the sound mixing, and the fact that they took an old movie like that and remixed it.
Yeah, so this is the original one.
The original Superman, the movie, is what the full title is called, as if they had to distinguish it from the comic book or the cartoon TV show or the live-action TV show. Yeah, so that was made, 1978, I think. And by the way, you look at it and you think, holy crap, is that ever good effects?
Yeah.
They're not computer effects, but they're effects, and even the opening titles look really cool. There's one really awkward place where it looks like somebody's holding up a sparkler and burning that over the images of space, but
yeah, well, and you never know, because sometimes when they do these 4K remasters, they also sometimes clean up the special effects.
Yeah.
So you'd have to look into it to see how much of that kind of work they did.
Well, I watched it, I went to bed, and I woke up and heard that Gene Hackman had died, because Gene Hackman is in that film. He plays the bad guy wonderfully. It's a somewhat comic role. But yeah, he was, and I think that was maybe one of the first times he'd played a lighter role like that. And he became famous for it. And then I woke up and it was such a weird experience, because what are the odds of me watching a Gene Hackman movie and waking up and finding him dead? But that's what happened.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to point out to the To Be Determined podcast people, Matt Farrell and his brother, that Superman the movie was actually shot in a similar place than where he came, over in Alberta, the next province over.
Yeah.
And this is from the behind the scenes video.
By now, the movie has moved to Alberta, Canada, chosen to represent the plains of Kansas. Ironically, they could not go to Kansas, as the wheat crop at the time of shooting had already been harvested. It is here that the infant Superman's 3-year journey came to an end on a remote field, to be discovered by Ma and Pa Kent. Pa Kent is played by Glenn Ford.
They also brought in, they had a shot on the train of a young Lois Lane on the train that he runs by when he's a teenager. And her parents, who don't say anything, they're just there, are the original cast from Superman, the TV show. They're older now. When was that, the 60s or 50s? I'm not sure, but yeah, they were there, and they brought them up as extras to Canada because it was a big film. And they shot both films at the same time, I believe, 1 and 2.
Yeah, or it might have been 2 and 3, but movie productions with a big budget like that, they'll often buy out a whole wheat field to make sure that it doesn't get harvested. So they could have done that in Kansas. But yeah, a lot of like Brokeback Mountain was shot in Alberta. Many, many movies shot, Alberta filling in for Kansas or whatever.
It's a beautiful place. It's boring. I admit that it's boring when I drive the 8 hours to Calgary. It gets tedious. But, I drive to Denver sometimes, and it gets tedious for me down there, too. I mean, some people like it. You liked it more than I did. But speaking of Alberta, I've got a Facebook post from the Alberta RCMP, that's the Provincial Police Force, with a photo of a van who forgot to take off their gas hose when they were filling up their van and drove away.
Yeah. Drove away with the nozzle in the tank.
Which is
and
dangerous.
Then took the nozzle and the hose with them.
And by the way, if you don't have an electric car, you might be wondering, well, gosh, I drive away with my block heater cords all the time with my gas-powered cars. I spent a lot of money on extension cords for those cars, right? It's got to have happened to you at one point.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you plug in your block heater, which we need here in our cold winters, and then you forget to unplug it, you drive away, and you'll see often cars driving down the street with like an extension cord trailing between the wheels.
And sometimes they'll just be there on the freeway or the road, and people will collect them because they're worth money. So, they call them road snakes or something around here. I think people have a colloquial name for them, but with electric cars, you cannot drive with the power. The car just knows you're plugged in, and it won't drive. It'll say, hey, go unplug yourself, and it's never an issue.
No,
the problem is, if you were in a dangerous situation, you're charging in an isolated place in the middle of the night, maybe you're a woman by yourself, you might not feel secure about being able to get out of that situation. So there's actually a company that made a product that breaks away. You put the charge cord into this breakaway product, and then the breakaway product goes in your car, and you can if you must push a button to pop it out so that your car thinks you're not plugged in anymore. Otherwise, it wouldn't let you go. So I don't know, but I haven't heard any examples of anything happening. But I could understand someone not feeling safe, because there are some poorly lit places too.
No, and if gas cars were being invented now, they would probably build that into it.
Sure.
So some kind of safety mechanism where the pump's got to be taken out and the thing closed up before you drive away. But as of now, no, there's nothing to stop you.
Brian, I am very pleased that the pair of eagles that I've been watching for years, partially due to the pandemic.
Yeah.
I've watched them for 2 seasons, and this is my 3rd. They're not on the nest during the summer, but in the winter they build up the nest, and there's a camera on that nest in California, Big Bear Valley. It's a lake, and if you're in California, you've probably seen these eagles on the news because they have updates on them all the time. But for 2 years, they didn't have a successful kid.
Oh, yeah.
There was no eggs that hatched, and they would sit on the eggs, and a month would go by, the 35 days, and they would keep sitting on them, but they would sit on them a little bit less and leave them, and then eventually the ravens would come and eat them, and then they wouldn't be on the nest, and then that would be it for the year. So, but this year they laid 3 eggs, and overnight, this is into Tuesday morning when we're recording this, there was 2 eggs hatched. This is it right now. This is a live feed. But yeah, no, there they are. Yeah, the mom eagle is, they don't actually sit on the eggs. They sit a little bit above the eggs, and they waddle around.
Really?
And under there is a chick and another egg with a good portion of the hole in it. And the weather is nice. You watch them, and these horrible blizzards happen. They're way up in the tree, and you can see how horrible nature is. And, but yeah, that's just something from the pandemic. Reconnecting with nature sort of was an important thing with me, and in all the stress of the world. But
it points out how difficult it is to be a filmmaker these days, because you go out and spend $100 million on a movie, a new Superman movie or something.
Yeah.
And then people are just going to watch, eagles having a baby instead because it's more entertaining.
It's high definition. The eagle, even at night you can watch with infrared. The eagles don't notice infrared camera, but it looks black and white. And yeah, that's what I did last night. Is I went back in the live stream to find when they zoom in on the eggs, because there's 65,000 viewers right now as we speak, but a lot of those are elementary schools, so they're just keeping it on at this classroom.
Yeah.
And all those 20 or 30 kids are watching and learning about nature, and nature is tough. Even when you're
that's really smart.
Even when you're near the top of the food chain, so it's very educational. There is a Friends of Big Bear Valley. You can go and donate to them. You can buy their merchandise. They, obviously are trying to help eagles and educate people, and yeah, it's very interesting.
All right, this story is from Canary Media. This map shows where to swap out industrial boilers for heat pumps. So we tend to talk more on the show about home heating and, home furnaces and switching out your home furnace for a heat pump. But of course, there's huge amounts of industry. U.S. manufacturers rely on more than 30,000 small industrial boilers to make a large number of things: food, drinks, paper, chemicals, clothes, electronics, furniture, transportation equipment, and more. These are mostly gas, but sometimes coal or oil. But these emissions don't just contribute to climate change. Of course, we know that they are terrible to breathe in. Increased asthma rates is the typical byproduct of these kinds of emissions. So the nonprofit American Council for Energy Efficient Economy, the ACEEE, has done the research. Only about 5% of process heat in industry currently comes from electricity. So this is ripe for electrification. Industrial heat pumps, though, are gaining momentum. And in fact, Southern California passed a rule last summer that they're going to try and phase out industrial boilers. So nitrogen oxides are one of the big pollutants that come out of these things. And it's harmful in itself, but also contributes to the formation of ozone, a key ingredient of smog that can inflame airways and cause a range of respiratory problems, including like increased asthma in kids. So the ACEEE mapped out areas where the ozone levels exceed the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency standard. So first of all, that's alarming. So there's places where these numbers are being exceeded, and up till now, like nothing has been done about it. And currently, they found more than 5,400 boilers in 174 counties, and they were focusing on the smaller industrial boilers because those are the ones that are going to be more easy to swap out for heat pumps. And it says their emissions are often overlooked, but easier to swap out for heat pumps. So an industrial boiler instead of a heat pump can be equivalent to taking 400 to 10,000 cars off the road, depending obviously on the size of it. And they found certain counties where this is particularly bad, where there's a lot of these small boilers. So Cook County in Illinois, they've got 297. Philadelphia County, 127. Harris County in Texas, 123. And Los Angeles County, 111. But, these heat pumps are now available. This is better for low temperature industrial processes. It says they're well suited to food and beverage manufacturing, which relies more on low heat, below 266 degrees Fahrenheit. So, low temperature heat is a better thing to swap them out. Chemical and paper production also uses a lot of lower temperature heat. So, this is going to happen eventually anyway. We all know that heat pumps are going to eventually take over, but this is great research because, we now know to accelerate in which particular areas to get the most benefit as quick as possible.
Yeah, that's the thing about cleaning up the air from local emissions. You can see the results, and we've had stories on our show before where it's been, it's predicted that people will die less, that there will be less asthma attacks and all kinds of things from local neighborhoods. And it's hard to quantify your effect on climate change, on global warming, if, you industrialize or you change from fossil fuels to a heat pump boiler. But if the local air gets cleaned up, you see that right away.
Yeah.
And, as a man who lives between a electric arc furnace steel mill that recycles, metal for pipelines and a heavy oil upgrader refinery on the other window action, I can tell you that you notice these things when the air is clean and when it's dirty. And I've got my air purifier beside me and it will kick on. My window's open today because it's a warm day. So if the wind shifts, it will kick on and I'll close my window. So I need more smart technology like light bulbs that will, set off an alarm. I need an air quality detector outdoors, but they're expensive. But we'll see. I wanted to talk about Pakistan solar. Pakistan is technically a developing country, and it's got a lot of population, but their grid sucks, Brian. It's terrible. Their electrical grid is terrible. So I listened to the Volts podcast, and we don't have guests on our podcast, so I go to other podcasts for the guests. And he had a couple experts of Pakistan Solar there. And this is all about a bottom-up clean energy revolution in developing countries like Pakistan. I remember Bloomberg New Energy Finance's Jenny Chase, the solar expert, had to use satellite images to understand what was going on in Pakistan, because all we know is that China is exporting many gigawatts of solar panels to Pakistan. We don't know where they're being used or how they're being used, and they had to do their own detective work on them. Apparently, the price of solar modules has gone from 24 cents per watt to 10 cents a watt in the last year or so in Pakistan. So Mustafa Amjad is a program director at Renewables First, an energy think tank based in Islamabad, and Waqas Moosa is the current chair of the Pakistan Solar Association and the CEO of Hadron Solar, which sells and installs solar systems across Pakistan. They were the guests on the podcast, and I listened to this damn podcast twice because I think I have some sort of attention deficit disorder, but I had to absorb it twice, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoy the information. It's a deep dive that most people aren't going to be into, but I found it interesting because this Pakistan question was a question, and people on the ground were able to give some insight into that. So 245 million people in Pakistan, Brian, that's quite a few people. 40 million of those don't have electricity at all. They don't have access to electricity at all. Solar is really becoming a part of life, and these two men have been on the ground and have seen the solar boom close up. Here's a clip from the show.
I remember there was this story which one of our microfinance guys was telling me. There's a concept of dowry in Pakistan. When there's a marriage, the bride's father usually, or the bride's family, would put together some appliances and the durable goods kind of thing, and they would make it as a gift to the newly married couple, and then they settle in. So recently, we've started seeing solar systems or small solar systems like a 3 kilowatt inverter with maybe 4 or 5 panels, and it's become like something which is sometimes included in the dowry itself. So it's
well, incredibly useful for a new family, right?
It's probably more useful than the washing machine or a television.
Yeah, so solar is that's a good illustration of how important it is and how
And what a great way to set up a couple.
Yeah.
Like the gift of power. That's absolutely
power is
amazing.
important. So Pakistan has 4 to 5 gigawatts, that's think of nuclear reactors, of solar in Pakistan right now, and 300 megawatts per month is getting installed, they think. The payback period is insane. It's only 1.5 years.
Wow.
I mean, we could be looking at 10 or 12 for a residential install here, but they're doing it cheaper. There's less regulations, and, local electricians are learning how to do things. And sometimes it's different. Here's an example. When a small business owner opens up their shop in the morning, they'll put up the shutters on the shop, and then they'll open the door, and they'll prop up like a solar panel in front with a piece of wood to face the sun, and a couple of wires you'll see running into the store, and that'll power maybe a light bulb, an LED light bulb, and maybe a small fan, and via a battery, such as a car battery or something like that. But yeah, that's what they're doing. Like, even, you see them everywhere. And even large industry is getting in on solar. They already have gas or diesel generators for, plants that like you're talking about. But due to the unreliability of the power grid, which is shut down for, 2/3 of the day, almost every day, and you don't know when it's going to be.
Yeah.
How can you run a business like that? You can't. So they have diesel or gas generators running, but they have devices that will integrate solar into those power systems. So when the sun comes out, the diesel generators keep running, but they go down to idle, and then they'll come back up as necessary. So they're integrating the two systems, kind of like a hybrid. And 60 to 70% of transport fuel used in Pakistan goes to 2- and 3-wheel vehicles of road transport, which are very easy to electrify. So that's coming. They just need education. So yeah, this is a bottom-up revolution in Pakistan. And it's, the electricity is very high there, very high cost. Of course, this is making it worse. This is what we always talk about, is the more renewables you have, the more these fossil fuel plants become less used. When they become less used, the price per unit of their electricity goes up because they're sitting idle. You still have to pay for the plant. But when they're sitting idle, you're not making any money. And this is a crisis that's happening in Pakistan. And Pakistan is not really embraced. They did early on embrace renewables, but they haven't recently. They've invested in coal, and the power grid is just going crazy.
Yeah.
It's falling apart because it's getting worse. Like every day there's more solar and people need them less. And then they say batteries are coming too. And this is something that you need to think about. You need to look at countries like Pakistan where they're doing this based on economics. Australia was another example of a first world country doing that because power was so expensive and the grid was, it paid off faster. So everybody did it. You saved money. And you're saving gobs of money with solar there.
Yeah, and as you were saying earlier, we know that rooftop solar is more expensive because it's more difficult. It's more expensive per panel, right? Because you got to climb up on the roof, and there's
you got to get permits. You got to get
Yeah. But what you need, and what they've done mostly in Australia, is just incentivize the average person to be able to do it. They've reduced the red tape and everything, and so then it doesn't end up costing your grid operator any money at all. You just incentivize people to do it, and then they're paying to essentially upgrade the whole grid. So it's like a win-win for everybody.
So in Australia, I don't know what the latest numbers are, but it's something like 1/3 of homes have solar panels on them.
Yeah.
And
crazy.
But it's made the grid actually better, but they have to upgrade certain parts of it. They do in Pakistan as well.
Yeah, we've talked about that before. They do have some challenges sometimes in the peak afternoon because they've got too much power because there's so much solar. But, there's ways to mitigate that with batteries and flywheels and so forth.
So as batteries become cheaper and better, and maybe even poor people in neighborhoods start installing them to get more of their solar because, you can use it at night then or in the evening, then the grids will fall apart because they won't, financially they'll fall apart. This is something that, when you advocate for a nuclear reactor and then, solar and batteries are so cheap that everybody in residential areas starts taking matters into their own hands, then that power reactor you can't stop the people. You can screw over people who set up solar farms, but you can't screw over the people who put solar on their houses, even if there's no feed-in tariffs. That's what keeps people away. We're using the grid as a battery now because we produce too much solar through, 5 or 6 months of the year, even where we are. Then it goes into the grid and we get paid for that electricity, which is more than the wholesale price for it. But if everybody starts doing that, and it's going to happen, because why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
In different places, the economics are different everywhere. Pakistan is a poor developing nation, and the electricity grid is unreliable and expensive, those two things, and getting more expensive all the time. You can't stop it then, right? This is economic forces that we've always talked about since day one.
Yeah, well, in certain places like where we live, the utility is a government monopoly. So they could literally just write a law and eliminate rooftop solar for customers if they wanted to.
I think there'd be a pretty big revolt against that, though.
It'd be a pretty big revolt. Instead, they've disincentivized, like they've lowered the rate that they pay for people with solar. So they've made it clear they don't really want people to do it, but you're in most places allowed to make your own damn power.
Due to the seasonality of the sun here, it would be tough. It's tough to go off grid. And it's possible.
Yeah.
If, there was a gun to your head, you could do it probably at your cottage, but you'd have to tear down some trees and put up a bunch of racks that you don't want to do. But it is possible.
Yeah.
But in other parts of the world where you need less energy for heating and you have less seasonality of the sun, it's longer days for more of the year, you would be able to do that, and then you don't need the power grid at all. So they get screwed there. They start losing customers, but that's the way it goes. Okay, Brian, it's time for our contest, the first one ever on the Clean Energy Show. I have before me, if you're listening to the podcast like most people do, I have a red cooking bowl, possibly mixing. Who knows if a chocolate cake was made in this? 1 point, nobody knows. We have a whole bunch of names. I don't know how many there are. They're on strips of paper. Oh, I dropped one. That's not the winner, though. Okay, so I'm going to draw a name here who will win 1 year free Clean Club membership on our Patreon page. It's too numerous to mention what they're going to get, but anybody who had a free Patreon account, which you can sign up for free and get a free Patreon account and use that as our social media page because we have free posts as well as the ones for the people who pay us money and support the show. We give them special bonus content such as our upcoming bonus podcast for Patreon, but one of these people is going to get it. But also, if you're on a lower tier, because you can support us for as little as $1 a month on the supporter tier, the custom donation, it's like $2.50 American or something, but you can make it a custom donation if you want, if as low as $1. And did I drop one? No, I didn't. I don't do contests often, Brian.
Yeah, well, this is real because there's an actual bowl with actual slips of paper in it.
Yes, there are, which took some time to get everybody's name together. So yeah, if you're one of those people who support us below the Clean Club, you also get entered into this. So this is exciting. This is a much better chance than winning the lottery. So here it is. I'm going to look away. It's on video. If you don't believe me that this is a fair, decent process, I've selected one paper, and that is Derek Green. Derek Green.
Fantastic.
You have won a 1 year membership. Johnny, what do they win?
A lifetime supply of joy. That's right. A lifetime supply of joy. But you also get ad-free episodes, early access to the show before the public, exclusive access to our Discord community, access to all our bonus episodes just for Patreon members, monthly shout-outs on our audio podcast, thank you credits on our video podcasts, merch discounts, and extended episodes when they occur. And like I said, a lifetime supply of joy. What more could you want, James, than a lifetime supply of joy?
Wow.
Wow.
Wow, wow, wow. Look at all that you get. Derek Green, you lucky devil. If you didn't win, you can always join and support the podcast for as little as $1 a month, or even for free just by being on our Patreon page, patreon.com/cleanenergypod. And that is exciting, Brian. Our first contest is now behind us.
Excellent. We're going to move on now to a story from Electrek. Massachusetts launches a 2-year Vehicle to X, V2X program, which means vehicle to everything. So this is a first of its kind statewide V2X pilot program. It's backed by the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and they're going to deploy 100 bidirectional chargers to homes, school buses, municipal, commercial fleets across the state. So these are bidirectional chargers that will enable EVs to serve as mobile energy storage units. And collectively, this will add about 1.5 megawatts of new storage capacity to the grid, which is on the small side, but that's not nothing. This is akin to people putting up solar, and before you know it, it's 1.5 megawatts on their houses.
But also, that small amount can really stabilize the grid as well and save a lot of money for the grid operator.
That could be the difference between a blackout or a brownout. So it says here, with the charging infrastructure provided through this program, so they're going to supply the equipment, they're eliminating the financial barriers. So, school districts, homeowners, and fleets can get access to this for cheap. So it's open now for enrollment through June of this summer. So if you're in Massachusetts, this is something you could maybe look into. Now, of course, I would prefer it wasn't a pilot program and that they were just rolling this out for good, because I think we know by now that this stuff actually works, and there's been similar programs elsewhere. So my hope is by 2030, we're not going to be talking about pilot programs anymore on this podcast, and things will start moving quicker.
That's exciting, because they don't really have to pay anything to be a part of this, or is it a small fee?
It sounds like the equipment is
because that's the expensive part. I mean, if you buy a Ford F-150 Lightning pickup truck that's all electric, you can get from Ford the ability to do vehicle to home, but it's expensive. It's it's a lot more expensive than, say, installing just a home charger, because it's two-way and it has to integrate with your the grid inside your house.
Yeah, and I know we had a story about a small utility somewhere in the U.S. where they were giving batteries to people, like in their homes. And, they were paying for the batteries because they just knew it was smart for them as well as for the homeowners. If you're going to have to deploy more grid stuff, that's, another way to do it.
Well, that's interesting. And that's another thing that can, like you say, take off rather quickly. And then the grid is finding that, maybe it doesn't need as much fossil fuels, and the economics of the grid changes quickly too. But on the other hand, they're saving gobs of money by the stability of the grid. Yeah,
there's always issues moving ahead with this stuff, but obviously it's an imperative. We got to move ahead with this stuff.
And by the way, on the Pakistan story, I found this interesting. They sometimes have two circuits in their house. They have a completely separate circuit for solar.
Oh yeah.
Say things that you want to keep on all the time, but maybe doesn't take a lot of power. And then they have another circuit. This is even in new houses for connecting to the grid. So you don't even have to connect to the grid, but maybe your solar runs lights, or maybe it runs a router. Who knows?
Yeah, you could. You don't have to hook up your solar to the rest of the system. So yeah, absolutely. I guess you could have two independently.
All right. Well, you can contact us, Brian.
Yeah, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. You can leave us a voicemail. No one's done that for a while. We always enjoy the voicemails, and it's at
love the voicemail.
speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow. And of course, join the Patreon page that we were talking about earlier. If unfortunately you didn't win the fantastic contest this week, you can always just pay for those privileges.
All right, I have a bad story here. But we talk so much about BYD, Build Your Dreams. That is the Chinese automotive company. It is the largest. China is now the largest exporter of cars in the world, surpassing Japan and even Korea. And they also are a battery maker. They were a battery maker before they became a car maker back in the late 90s, I think. And they got into lithium ion, and that was for phones and everything else and other gadgets. And then they got into cars. They make crappy cars. Now they make good cars, and they are the number one maker of cars in China. They make high quality cars that are equal or better than our Western cars as far as build quality on non-luxury vehicles. But we do have to talk about them because they are important. China and BYD is important to the decarbonization of the planet. But there's a negative side. And so from time to time, I have to, bring up the negative side of this from China. This story was reported by multiple news outlets on Christmas Eve. That's why I missed it. This goes back to Christmas Eve. Us in North America tend to be busy on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, you were taking some time off.
Sure. More than 160 Chinese nationals were found living in degrading conditions and working excessive hours in Brazil. So BYD I think they were refurbishing an old Ford car factory there. And this was a large ongoing process. And 160 people from China went there to work on it. They had to sign contracts and things. And Brazil found that they were working in degrading conditions, and that is to say the least. Brazilian authorities have halted the construction of a factory for the Chinese electric vehicle company BYD after they found 160 Chinese nationals living in slavery-like conditions, which is not something you want to hear with a company that you want to support. The workers based in a construction site in the northeastern Brazilian state Bahia were found to be laboring for excessive hours, sometimes for 7 days straight, and living in degrading accommodation. The workers who were hired by our contractor, by BYD, called Xinjiang Construction Brazil, were said to be unable to leave without permission, and more than 100 had their passports withheld. You can't do that. The workers were hired in China and brought to Brazil. Quote, minimum safety conditions were not being met in the work environment, authorities added. In Brazil, slavery-like conditions include forced labor, as well as degrading work conditions, long hours that pose a risk to workers' health, debt bondage, when a person is forced to work to pay off a debt rather than get new pay, and any work that violates human dignity. The investigation found that workers were forced to sleep on beds without any mattresses, and more than 600 workers had been sharing 8 portable toilets. 8 portable toilets for 600 were in deplorable state, lacking toilet paper and water. A lack of kitchen space also meant food was being stored near bathrooms and in unsanitary conditions. BY said it does not tolerate disrespect for Brazilian law and human dignity, and that it had immediately terminated the contract with Xinjiang for part of the work at the factory, was considering other appropriate measures. By the way, the same construction company works for them in China, so who knows what's going on there. Although China does have some labor laws, believe it or not. I mean, they were kind of exploited maybe because they were in another country. I don't know. But yeah, there's also bad labor situations that we've talked about before in China as well that have gone on with sort of, bigotry against certain groups. So it's said that all the workers will be transferred to hotels in the region, and the company has launched a detailed review of working and living conditions of all employees hired by contractors working on this project. BYD added that the company had been operating in Brazil for 10 years, always strictly following local legislation and maintaining its commitment to ethics, respect, and human dignity. More recently, Reuters had followed up on this situation, Brian, about the January 31st, I think, and they said the workers from China earned roughly $70 per 10-hour shift, which is actually over twice the Chinese hourly minimum wage in many regions. Chinese minimum wage is low because cost of living is low in China. Workers had to hand over their passports to the contractor and had to make $900 deposit that they would lose if they did not work 6 months. The conditions, it should be pointed out, violated working labor laws in Brazil and China. 200 yuan fines for conduct like swearing, quarreling, and going shirtless.
Well, that's a good thing that you were not there.
Yeah, I'd be fined up the kilt. 31 workers were found to be living in one house with one bathroom. And yeah, like I said, BYD hires this subcontractor construction company in China as well. Anyway, it is time for our bonus podcast that's coming up, Brian. That goes out to our Clean Club members. We have different tiers of membership on our Patreon page. The Clean Club is the basic one for about $5 a month, although you can go lower. Those people get rewarded with a bonus podcast every month. And I've got a story about how the oil industry screwed science. The Chicxulub crater, that is the crater off the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. That's the crater they discovered wiped out the dinosaurs.
Wow.
But the thing is, an oil company found it first and kept it quiet for 10 years, holding back science for 10 years. That's coming
Yes, because
up.
they knew if they told somebody, something might happen. But so you wanted to talk about that on the bonus episode.
That's coming up in our bonus episode, which we'll record later this week for our Patreon members. Coming up next, why it's the lightning round. It's time for the lightning round.
The Lightning Round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
Trump returns. Prompts companies to stifle climate talk with green hushing. Here's a new term for you, Brian. File this under crap. Green hushing, not greenwashing, green hushing. Businesses that used to tout carbon cutting are switching their message. This isn't a good time to put a red flag in front of the bull. Because you know what? The Magites will go after you if you start touting anything that is clean for the planet, because that, of course, is woke crap to them. That story's on Bloomberg, and like all stories, we try to put the links in your show notes to those stories. About 65 nuclear reactors are under construction across the world, and 90 further reactors are planned. Always update the nuclear situation. You remember the Chevy Spark, Brian? That is a tiny Chevrolet, and they had an electric version of it long before the Bolt that I drive.
Yeah, and it was sort of a compliance car made mostly for California, if I recall. It was just a normal gas Chevy Spark that had the engine taken out and some batteries put in, so cheap and kind of short range.
Yeah, they're a tiny car, but it's coming back. And you know what? When I went looking in the province of Quebec across the continent because they had good incentives, they had a number of electric cars when I bought the Leaf there about 7 years ago. And there were some Sparks around. There were some Chevy Sparks around Quebec, and I considered it, but I'm a big guy and didn't want to really get that small of a car and wasn't sure about Chevrolet as a brand. But they are bringing it back, but not for North America, but largely for countries like South America and Africa and the Middle East, where small cars are all right to those populations, whereas we're driving giant SUVs and pickup trucks here. It's only going to have 50 kilowatt charging, but it's going to be cheap and have a 220 mile range. And I think they'll have different versions. It kind of looks like a small Kia Soul, or is that fair?
Yeah. Or a Chevy Bronco. No, It's a nice looking car. It certainly looks way better than the Chevy Spark, but at 50 kilowatt charging, it probably has the same kind of underpinnings as, the Chevy Bolt, that they can sort of reuse that Chevy Bolt platform without spending too much money, probably.
So they're sort of relegating in this day and age to a city car, I would say, if you're coming out with a new car with 50 kilowatt charging. That's the supercharging. You can still charge it at home at the normal rates that everyone else does. Japanese firefighters are struggling to contain a week-long wildfire on the country's northeastern coast that has spread to become the worst the country has seen in half a century. Wow. Time for a CS Fast Fact. Parking lot solar canopies that track the sun. Those are the ones that follow the sun from the east to the west. Just like Barry, we got a friend with one of those on his property. And we wondered, how much more electricity do you get from tracking? Well, in parking lot solar canopies, at least, it's 25 to 45% more. So probably worth it for the mechanical aspect, which increases the price instead of just mounting them solidly. These motors that follow the sun will probably have to be maintained from time to time, parts replaced, and maybe they'll break down. Who knows, because they have moving parts. But it might be worth it because that is giving you, fairly significant amount more electricity. Australia braces for a rare tropical cyclone, Alfred, as residents are warned to get out now. A Category 1 cyclone is intensifying off Queensland's coast and expected to be one of the region's most destructive storms in decades. Why? Because apparently the building construction isn't great there. They don't plan for storms, and the storms usually don't go this far south. So this is climate change, This is in northwest coast of Canada and the United States, having to get air conditioners where they never needed them. We're going to have to build stronger homes in some places that never needed them before.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about fireproofing your homes after the big LA fires. And this stuff is it's still not really part of our building codes when it absolutely should be.
Norway is going to allow cities to set zero-emission transport zones. So in Norway, we know that their electric vehicle sales are now close to 100%. These zones will help drive the uptake in battery-powered vans for deliveries and so forth. So if you want to drop off parcels and supplies to a business in downtown, maybe you're going to have to go electric because maybe they're not satisfied with how that's going. 100% electric vehicles in Europe sales right now are now at 17%. That's not including all the plug-in hybrid, which are quite popular at the moment. So that's pretty good. BYD devoted 2,000 plus engineers to work on, get this, a drone that goes with their vehicles.
Wow.
With DJI, the drone maker, the drone that I wish that I could have. It's there. Yeah. And they have got so many engineers that they assign 2,000 of them just for the stupid drone project. So you can have a drone that leaves your vehicle. This is the first time somebody's done this, but you can get the option of a drone. It leaves your vehicle, gives you an image from bird's eye of where you are if you're going through the back country. I don't know.
Yeah, or if you're in traffic, you can get a sense of what the traffic jam is ahead of you. Wasn't there like a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode where he was going to invent a periscope to see so you could see the traffic ahead of you?
Yes, I remember that. It's coming back. It was slow, but yeah, that happened. Well, first of all, that's illegal to fly a drone over traffic. We're in Canada and the United States, I think.
If it's small enough, you probably can.
Okay.
If it's a certain size, there's not much regulation.
Well, it has to be under 250 grams, I think. And and you don't need a license or a registration for it. But the fact that they put 2,000 engineers makes me think they're bleeding engineers over there. There's all kinds of them.
Yeah.
One of Norway's largest marine fuel companies just announced that they will no longer refuel U.S. Navy vessels after Trump's treatment of Ukraine's President Zelensky. U.S. lobster catch drops as crustaceans migrate to colder Canadian waters. So tariff that, Donnie. Your lobsters are moving north because it's too hot due to climate change. What are you going to do about that?
And they don't need a travel visa for that.
No, the border wall will not stop them. Reducing emissions by 87% in the United Kingdom by 2040 would help cut household costs by £1,400 per year. Pretty significant amount of savings for that. China may be ready to use nuclear fusion for power by 2050. Fusion is not fission. It's joining atoms instead of splitting them.
No, and we have talked about it before. This is still a bit of a moonshot kind of thing if fusion's going to work. And 2050 is quite a long way away. So this would still be a pretty iffy proposition, I would say.
I agree, but this is the first time we've had a date assigned, a target. And that is significant because we knew that it's always 30 years off, right? It's one of those things that's always 30 years off, even with the accomplishment that they made in a lab recently.
And now it's only 25 years off.
Well, now it's only 25. So, yeah. But they aim to commercialize nuclear fusion technology for use in emissions-free power generation by 2050. So, another thing, people say, well, we'll just do fusion. Let's don't do anything. We'll just wait for fusion. Well, you can't because you have to decarbonize the grid by 2035 to 2040, depending on who you ask. So, yeah, it's got to get done. So, and this is the best case scenario, too, right? So China National Nuclear Corp, which runs an experimental device dubbed the Artificial Sun, could start commercial operation of its first power generation project about 5 years after a demonstration phase starts around 2045, it said in a media briefing on Friday. Brian, finally this week, after an oil change, a woman found a racial slur printed on the oil change sticker placed inside her SUV. This is in Wisconsin, United States. But now she's getting a free electric vehicle. Family Nissan, a dealership nearly 900 miles away, just outside New York City, is giving her a free Leaf EV, saying she won't need an oil change ever again. Electric cars don't have an engine, so they don't have oil. Oil changes suck. The electric car was specifically chosen so that the shocking incident doesn't happen again. The incident happened last month at Coons Buick GMC in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, when Michaela Starks found a racial slur printed on her vehicle's oil change sticker. Her story went viral, and now a Nissan dealership nearly 900 miles away is giving her a free Leaf. It was about giving her an electric car, they said, that doesn't need oil changes ever again. The racist employee was fired immediately, but of course the victim is still pretty upset about this. At least many more people, Brian, will now know that one of the advantages of electric car, no racist stickers inside your car from oil change goons.
Nice.
She is flying to New York on Friday to officially pick up her new Leaf from Family Nissan and does not plan to keep the vehicle she bought from the offending Wisconsin dealership in Buick. So, yeah, but they should ship her the car because, it's going to be a pain in the ass to drive a Leaf with short range and terrible charging.
Yeah. It's not ideal, but yeah, I'm sorry to hear that happened in Wisconsin. I had such a fun time there.
That's your fault. The wave of a butterfly, you're going there, set off a chain reaction to the butterfly effect of this racist incident.
And on that note, That is our show for this week. You can contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. On social media, we're Clean Energy Pod. You can join that Patreon that we've been talking about. There's a merch store with stuff you can buy. We'd love to get reviews on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get the show. And always, when you're on those apps, if you're listening to the show, please remember to hit that follow or subscribe button.
Well, thank you to all our Patreon members, especially the Clean Club executive members who get mentioned every week, Green Bastard and Brent Rutley. And once a month, we mention some of our other Clean Club members. Plus members in the Clean Club are Wes S. and Bob Armstrong. Clean Club members Sean Ennis, Roshan Gervais, Tiernan, Weldon Penner, Joss Engen, Peter O'Donnell, Andy Fessler, Sean Hines, and Timo Kallenberger. Thank you to everyone, and also thank you to all of the people on our supporter levels who don't get a shout-out, but we're going to send our love to you. Anyway, thank you very much for supporting the show. You make the podcast happen. Join our Patreon today as a paying member and get access to all of the Patreon episodes that are coming up. And we'll talk to you again in about 1 week.
Yes, unless you're a Patreon member, with bonus episode coming up soon. But otherwise, we'll see you next week.